Okay, before we look at the transfer dynamics, let me point out one thing here. If I were to change the background color, we can see that the snails aren't changing in opacity at any point. They're just changing the color, and sometimes the color was similar to the background color, which caused an effect like transparency, but that's just a lie. If we change the background color, we can see in fact that these snails are the same opacity. They're somewhat transparent in some locations where it was white at the time we captured the brush, and it's very vibrant in color in the dark locations where the brush capture occurred. This is important because we're about to look at how to actually adjust the opacity on the fly, and that happens, let me readjust this, close enough. That happens under, grab my brush with B on the keyboard, transfer. Before I do transfer, let's turn off the color dynamics for a moment. Transfer. Okay, I will clear out those bad boys and pop in a new one, and we'll just do this on a white background again. So right now we just have our snail. Excellent. So let's do one thing first. We'll pop back over to the tip shape. The brush tip shape, and we'll knock that spacing down so we have a nice little overlap. Time snail. Look at him go. Wee. All right, so we've got the snail. We're going to pop over to transfer, and keep in mind if you have Photoshop, I want to say before 2014, when the mixer brush was installed, this will be called Other Dynamics. When the mixer brush came to be, we had wetness jitter and mix jitter added in. Those are controls for the mixer brush. We'll talk about those when we go over the erodible brushes, the bristle brushes, and the air brushes. We'll also cover the mix brushes because they're a little bit different, and you may not actually want to use them for this assignment, but they're super useful when you're doing painting. When they added these in, they decided, hey, why not randomly change a name to make it more confusing for everyone? And then they did that, so watch out for that. Okay, so we've got our snail, and we have opacity jitter and flow jitter. Well, from earlier in this video set, you guys will recall that opacity is the hard cap on how much opacity you can have from a single brush stroke. You'd have to lift your mouse or your pen and do another stroke to make it any darker, and repeat this process again and again and again until you get to the full level of darkness that you're after. Keep in mind that because the snail is mostly transparent, 54% means that it's not fully blocked in. 54%, sorry. 108%, which would be clicking twice at 54%, doesn't mean the snail is fully blocked in. It means that the snail is just darker than it would have been. You'd have to keep clicking a whole bunch of times to get just this cut out of a snail. Or you could recapture the snail doing some adjustments and all that stuff. Flow, on the other hand, if we were to pop over to flow, is a tip-by-tip calculation, essentially. As you pass back over with the same stroke, it will keep getting darker every single time until it's reached absolute maximum opacity. And you can see that eventually that just occurs, and that's happening without me having to lift my mouse every single time. Okay, so we pop those back up to maximum. That's controllable within the transfer. So if we increase opacity jitter, we'll see that the opacity is changing. But if I cross back over where it was already pretty high, it remains pretty high, right? So it's 45%. But if we do a flow, this is where it gets absolutely insane. You can keep mousing back over and it will very quickly build up. Now, this may not look that different, but it becomes pretty different when you start doing things like color dynamics. For example, see how it's smushed together? Let's make sure that that's supposed to be happening with our color dynamics. Let's do a foreground background jitter. Let's do a higher purity. We'll do no brightness or saturation. We'll just do hue. And we'll do that on a tip by tip. All right, we'll clear that out. Come back to transfer. Here's no flow jitter. Here is a high flow jitter. We can see that each individual little fella is a very different opacity going on. And if we do opacity jitter instead, we'll see that overall it remains a randomly set opacity. You can see that better when there are other things like our color dynamics going on. So let me turn that off now. Okay, so what else can we do? Well, glad you asked. We can set it to controls, and that means that we can do opacity according to the pen pressure. This is a lot of fun. Let me grab my tablet. So I can make something more or less transparent depending on how hard I press. And I could just fade things away. And that will happen over time. I have 100% jitter though, so it's masking everything. Again, let me get rid of the randomness on that and try this one more time. Here it is soft, here it is hard, here it is soft to hard. Here it is soft to hard to soft. You can see that the transparency is changing according to how hard I'm pressing down. This blends nicely together with some of the other abilities that we've discovered under shape dynamics, for example, if we add that in to the pen pressure for size. Now not only will it become smaller, it will become more transparent. Pretty crazy, right? I like that a lot. So you can create some really interesting brushes pretty quickly by doing this. This has kind of a marker feel to it at this point. Are you pressing down on the marker and, saturating it, or are you pulling up? Now you can replicate that sort of command. Now flow will do the same thing. Let me turn off pen pressure. If I do a flow pressure instead, where are you? Pen pressure for flow. And let's actually get a different color and swap the foreground color. Let's do a green, high green. Okay, here we go. Light, hard, light to hard to light, and then looping over itself lightly, looping it over itself hard, looping over itself light, hard, light. There you go. Yeah, that's basically the last of the standard commands. At this point, we have a wetness jitter and a mix jitter, and that will apply directly to something called the mixer brush. If you click and hold on the brush, you'll see you've got something called mixer brush. We'll cover that a little bit later. We also have something called brush pose, which only really relates if you're using an erodible brush or, under shape dynamics, brush projection. Essentially, brush pose is a way of locking in a modeled brush. So we'll cover this one when we go over the different kinds of brush tips, which we will start doing next video. I believe that is everything. So congratulations on making it this far. Bear with me. We're going to cover some really cool stuff up next, which has to do with the different types of brushes that Photoshop can model other than the capture brush. See you next video.